You've spent your whole life being taught that you need to speak louder, fight harder, and constantly prove your worth to be respected. But 2,500-year-old Buddhist teachings reveal something completely different. When a woman stops wasting energy trying to convince the world of her value and starts cultivating power in silence, something extraordinary happens. The doors that were closed begin to open by themselves. The people who ignored you suddenly pay attention. The problems that seemed impossible find solutions naturally. It's not magic, it's a spiritual law that works every time you apply it. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you're watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. Have you ever noticed how the loudest voices in the room aren't always the ones people actually listen to? There's something fascinating happening in our world right now, especially when it comes to how women navigate their personal and professional lives, and it has everything to do with an ancient wisdom that Buddhism has been teaching for over 2,500 years. We live in a culture that constantly tells women they need to be louder, more assertive, more visible to get what they deserve. Social media feeds us endless messages about speaking up, leaning in, and making sure everyone knows your worth. But here's what's interesting about this approach. It often leaves women feeling exhausted, frustrated, and somehow still not getting the recognition or results they're seeking. They're putting in enormous amounts of energy, trying to convince others of their value, and yet the doors they want to open remain stubbornly closed. Buddhist philosophy offers a completely different perspective on this struggle. One that might seem counterintuitive at first, but has proven its effectiveness across millennia. The concept centers around the idea that true power doesn't come from external validation or constant self-promotion, but from an internal cultivation of strength that naturally draws opportunities and respect without force or struggle. When we look at the fundamental Buddhist principle of non-attachment, we start to understand why this approach works so effectively. Non-attachment doesn't mean not caring about outcomes or being passive about your goals. Instead, it means releasing the desperate need to control how others perceive you or respond to you. It's about focusing your energy on developing your skills, character, and inner wisdom, rather than spending that same energy trying to manage other people's opinions. Think about this practically. When someone is constantly trying to prove their worth, there's an underlying energy of desperation or neediness that others can sense, even if it's not explicitly expressed. People are naturally drawn to confidence and repelled by desperation, regardless of how skilled or accomplished the desperate person might be. This creates a paradox where the harder someone tries to convince others of their value, the less valuable they appear. Buddhism teaches that silence and focused self-development create a different kind of presence entirely. When a woman stops scattering her energy trying to convince everyone around her of her capabilities and instead channels that energy into actually developing those capabilities, something remarkable happens. She becomes more competent, more centered, and more genuinely confident. This authentic confidence has a magnetic quality that forced confidence simply cannot replicate. The practice of mindful silence, which is central to many Buddhist traditions, isn't about becoming a doormat or avoiding important conversations. It's about choosing when and how to engage from a place of strength rather than reaction. When you're not constantly defending your position or trying to prove your point, you have the mental space to observe situations more clearly, make better decisions, and respond rather than react to challenges. Consider how this plays out in professional settings. A woman who's constantly highlighting her achievements, interrupting to make sure her voice is heard, or arguing every point might be technically right about her qualifications, but she's creating an energy that makes others want to resist her rather than support her. Meanwhile, a woman who does excellent work, speaks thoughtfully when she has something valuable to contribute, and doesn't need everyone to acknowledge her brilliance, often finds that opportunities begin to present themselves naturally. This isn't about being passive or accepting unfair treatment. Buddhist philosophy actually emphasizes the importance of right action, which sometimes requires speaking up or taking decisive steps. The difference is that these actions come from a place of inner certainty rather than external validation seeking. When you know your worth internally, you don't need to convince others of it constantly, and paradoxically, this makes it much easier for others to recognize and respect that worth. The concept of karma, fundamental to Buddhism, also plays a crucial role here. Karma isn't just about good things happening to good people, it's about the natural consequences that flow from our actions and intentions. When your actions are motivated by genuine service, excellence, and authentic self-expression rather than by the need for approval or recognition, the energy you put out into the world is completely different. This different energy creates different results. Many women have been conditioned to believe that if they don't constantly advocate for themselves, they'll be overlooked or taken advantage of. While there's some truth to the reality of gender bias and systemic challenges, the Buddhist approach suggests that fighting these challenges from a place of inner peace and strength is far more effective than fighting them from a place of frustration and desperation. When you focus on developing your skills, deepening your knowledge, and cultivating genuine relationships rather than on getting credit or recognition, several things happen simultaneously. First, you actually become more skilled and knowledgeable, which makes you more valuable in any context. Second, you develop the kind of quiet confidence that people find naturally attractive and trustworthy. Third, you free up enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy that can be redirected toward creative problem solving and innovative thinking. The Buddhist concept of right speech is particularly relevant here. Right speech isn't just about being honest, it's about speaking in ways that are helpful, necessary, and well-timed. When you're not compulsively talking to prove your worth, you can choose your words more carefully. You can wait for moments when your input will be most valuable and most likely to be heard. You can ask better questions instead of making statements designed to showcase your knowledge. This approach also aligns with the Buddhist understanding of interconnectedness. When you stop seeing every interaction as a competition where you need to establish your superiority or defend your position, you can start seeing how you fit into the larger web of relationships and circumstances around you. This broader perspective often reveals opportunities and solutions that weren't visible when you were focused primarily on your own recognition. The practical application of these principles doesn't require becoming a Buddhist or adopting any particular religious beliefs. It simply requires shifting your focus from external validation to internal development. Instead of spending time crafting social media posts about your achievements, spend that time actually working on something meaningful. Instead of networking events where you're trying to impress people, engage in activities where you can learn and contribute. Instead of arguing your point in every meeting, listen more carefully and contribute when you have something genuinely valuable to add. Women who apply these principles often report that they feel less stressed and more focused. They stop wasting energy on situations and people who aren't aligned with their values or goals. They become more selective about where they invest their time and attention, which naturally leads to better outcomes. They develop what Buddhists call equanimity, a balanced state of mind that isn't thrown off by either praise or criticism. This internal stability becomes a form of power that others can sense but can't manipulate or undermine. When your sense of worth isn't dependent on external feedback, people can't use the withdrawal of approval as leverage against you. When you're not desperately seeking opportunities, you can evaluate them more objectively and make better choices about which ones to pursue. The transformation that happens when women embrace this approach isn't magical, but it can seem that way because the results are so different from what most people expect. Opportunities do start to appear more frequently, but it's because you're in a better position to recognize them and act on them. People do start to treat you with more respect, but it's because you're carrying yourself differently and making different choices about how to engage. Problems do seem to resolve more easily, but it's because you're approaching them from a clearer, more strategic mindset rather than from emotional reactivity. Buddhism teaches that suffering often comes from our attachment to how we think things should be, rather than working skillfully with how things actually are. For many women, there's tremendous suffering in the gap between how they believe they should be treated and how they actually experience the world. The Buddhist approach doesn't ignore this gap or accept injustice, but it focuses on working with reality as it exists while cultivating the inner resources needed to create positive change. This cultivation of inner resources, wisdom, compassion, patience, and authentic confidence, becomes the foundation from which effective action can emerge. When you're not depleted from constantly trying to manage other people's perceptions, you have more energy available for the work that actually matters. When you're not reactive to every slight or oversight, you can choose your battles more strategically and fight them more effectively. The silence that Buddhism values isn't the silence of suppression or fear. It's the silence of depth, contemplation, and inner knowing. It's the difference between someone who has nothing to say and someone who chooses their words carefully because they understand their power. It's the difference between someone who's quiet because they're intimidated and someone who's quiet because they're listening, learning, and preparing to act from wisdom rather than impulse. This understanding of inner wisdom and strategic silence leads us naturally into something equally important that many women struggle with: maintaining the quality and authenticity of their personal growth journey when everyone around them seems to have opinions about how they should be living their lives. You know what's really interesting about our current culture? We're constantly bombarded with advice, strategies, and systems that promise to transform our lives, but very few people talk about how to actually evaluate whether these approaches are genuinely helping us or just adding more noise to our already cluttered minds. When a woman decides to focus on herself and embrace a quieter, more contemplative approach to life, she suddenly finds herself dealing with a flood of well-meaning suggestions, critiques, and pressure from family, friends, and society at large. The challenge becomes learning how to maintain high standards for what information, practices, and influences you allow into your personal development process. It's like being a quality control inspector for your own life, but instead of checking products on an assembly line, you're evaluating ideas, relationships, and opportunities to see if they actually align with the peaceful, centered life you're trying to build. Most people don't realize how much mental energy gets wasted processing low-quality input. Think about it. You wake up in the morning with a certain amount of mental and emotional bandwidth available for the day. If you immediately start scrolling through social media, reading news headlines designed to trigger strong reactions, or listening to podcasts that leave you feeling more confused than enlightened, you've already spent a significant portion of your daily capacity on content that doesn't actually serve your goals. The Buddhist approach to personal development emphasizes discernment, which is basically the ability to distinguish between what's genuinely useful and what just feels important in the moment. When you're trying to cultivate inner peace and authentic confidence, this discernment becomes absolutely critical. You start noticing the difference between content that leaves you feeling grounded and clear versus content that leaves you feeling agitated, inadequate, or overwhelmed with information you'll never actually use. Here's something most people don't think about. The quality of your personal growth directly impacts every other area of your life. When you're constantly consuming advice that contradicts itself, jumping from one self-improvement trend to another, or trying to implement strategies that don't actually fit your personality or circumstances, you're essentially training yourself to be inconsistent and scattered. This shows up in your work, your relationships, and your ability to make clear decisions about what you want. Women who successfully embrace the quieter, more self-focused approach often have to become really selective about whose opinions they consider valuable. This doesn't mean becoming closed-minded or refusing to learn from others, but it does mean developing clear criteria for evaluating input. Is this person speaking from genuine experience or just repeating something they heard? Do their suggestions align with your values and long-term goals, or are they projecting their own insecurities and limitations onto your situation? One of the biggest challenges in maintaining quality standards for personal development is dealing with the pressure to constantly be optimizing and improving. The self-help industry has created this environment where people feel like they should always be working on themselves, always implementing new strategies, always pursuing the next level of success or fulfillment. But the Buddhist perspective suggests that this constant striving can actually interfere with the deeper work of simply being present with yourself and allowing natural growth to unfold. When you're focused on quality over quantity in your personal development, you start paying attention to different metrics. Instead of measuring how many books you've read or courses you've completed, you start noticing whether you're actually becoming calmer, more decisive, and more capable of handling challenges without losing your center. Instead of collecting techniques and strategies, you focus on deeply understanding and consistently applying a smaller number of practices that genuinely resonate with you. This shift in approach often means saying no to a lot of opportunities that look good on the surface but don't actually contribute to your specific goals. Maybe there's a workshop that everyone's talking about, but you realize it's focused on extroverted networking strategies that don't align with your preference for building deeper, more meaningful professional relationships. Maybe there's a book that's getting great reviews, but when you read the first chapter, you can tell the author's personality and approach don't mesh well with your learning style. The ability to filter out low-quality input becomes especially important when you're dealing with criticism or pushback from people who don't understand your choice to prioritize inner development over external achievement. Family members might worry that you're becoming too passive or antisocial. Colleagues might interpret your more thoughtful, less reactive communication style as disengagement. Friends might feel uncomfortable with the fact that you're no longer as available for drama-filled conversations or last-minute social obligations. Maintaining your standards in these situations requires a kind of gentle firmness that many women find challenging at first. You're not trying to convince anyone that your approach is right for them, but you're also not going to let their discomfort derail your progress. You develop ways of acknowledging their concerns without absorbing their anxiety or feeling obligated to justify your choices in detail. One practical aspect of quality control that often gets overlooked is the physical environment where you do your thinking and reflection. When you're trying to cultivate inner peace and clarity, it makes a huge difference whether you're doing this work in a cluttered, chaotic space or in an environment that supports concentration and calm. This doesn't mean you need to spend a lot of money redecorating, but it does mean being intentional about creating conditions that support the kind of mental state you're trying to develop. The same principle applies to your digital environment. Most people's phones and computers are cluttered with apps, notifications, and bookmarks that constantly pull their attention in different directions. When you're serious about maintaining quality standards for your personal development, you start treating your digital tools the same way you treat your physical workspace: organized, purposeful, and free of distractions that don't serve your goals. Another dimension of quality control that's often overlooked is the timing and pacing of personal development activities. There's a difference between engaging with growth-oriented content when your mind is fresh and receptive versus consuming it when you're tired, stressed, or multitasking. Many people treat personal development like entertainment, something to listen to while commuting, exercising, or doing household chores. But if you're serious about actually integrating new insights and practices into your life, you need to give them the same focused attention you'd give to any other important learning process. This means being selective not just about what you consume, but when and how you consume it. Maybe you decide that you'll only engage with new personal development content during a specific time of day when you can give it your full attention. Maybe you implement a practice of taking notes or journaling about key insights immediately after reading or listening to something, rather than just moving on to the next piece of content. The quality control process also extends to how you evaluate your own progress and setbacks. Instead of judging yourself harshly when you don't implement something perfectly or when you fall back into old patterns, you develop a more objective, curious approach to self-assessment. You start asking questions like, what conditions were present when this practice worked well for me, and what was different about the situations where I struggled to maintain consistency? This kind of honest self-evaluation requires a level of emotional maturity that many people haven't developed. It means being able to look at your own behavior and choices without immediately jumping into shame, blame, or defensive justifications. It means being able to acknowledge areas where you need more support or different strategies without interpreting this as evidence that you're fundamentally flawed or incapable of growth. One of the most challenging aspects of maintaining quality standards in personal development is learning to trust your own judgment about what works for you, even when it contradicts popular advice or conventional wisdom. Maybe meditation in the traditional sitting position doesn't work well for your body type or attention style, but walking meditation or mindful movement feels much more natural and effective. Maybe the morning routine that everyone recommends leaves you feeling rushed and stressed, but you've discovered that evening reflection and planning sets you up for better days. The pressure to follow prescribed formulas and step-by-step systems can be intense, especially for women who have been socialized to please authority figures and follow rules. But authentic personal development often requires adapting general principles to fit your specific circumstances, personality, and life situation. This means developing enough confidence in your own experience to modify or abandon approaches that aren't serving you, even if they're working well for other people. Quality control also means being realistic about the timeline for meaningful change. The self-help industry often promotes the idea that dramatic transformation can happen quickly if you just find the right technique or system. But sustainable growth usually happens gradually, with periods of rapid progress followed by plateaus where you're integrating what you've learned. Understanding this natural rhythm helps you avoid the disappointment and self-criticism that comes from expecting constant forward momentum. When you maintain high standards for the quality of your personal development process, you start noticing that you need less external validation and support to stay motivated. Instead of relying on accountability partners, group challenges, or social pressure to maintain your practices, you develop an internal sense of satisfaction and progress that sustains you through difficult periods. You become more selective about which communities and relationships support your growth and less tolerant of environments that consistently drain your energy or undermine your confidence. This internal validation system becomes particularly important for women who are choosing a less conventional path focused on inner development rather than external achievement. When your progress isn't easily visible or measurable by traditional standards, you need to develop your own ways of recognizing and celebrating growth. Maybe it's noticing that you responded to a difficult conversation with more patience than you would have 6 months ago, or recognizing that you made a decision based on your own values rather than what you thought others expected of you. This internal validation system works best when it's supported by a practical understanding of how to blend your natural creative instincts with the efficiency that comes from structured approaches to personal development. The reality is that most women find themselves caught between two extremes. Either they're trying to force themselves into rigid systems that feel completely unnatural, or they're so focused on following their intuition that they never develop consistent practices that actually create lasting change. What's fascinating about this challenge is that it mirrors something that's been happening in workplaces for decades. Companies have discovered that their most innovative and productive teams aren't the ones that rely entirely on creative brainstorming sessions, and they're also not the ones that follow strict protocols without any room for adaptation. The most successful teams figure out how to combine human creativity and insight with systematic processes that actually get things done. The same principle applies to personal development, especially for women who are trying to create a calmer, more centered way of living. You need both the creative, intuitive part of yourself that knows what feels right and resonates with your deeper values. And you also need some practical systems that help you maintain consistency even when motivation is low or life gets complicated. Let's talk about what this actually looks like in practice. Most women start their personal development journey by collecting information and inspiration. They read books, listen to podcasts, follow social media accounts that share meaningful quotes and insights. This is the creative, exploratory phase where you're figuring out what approaches and philosophies resonate with you. It's important and necessary, but it's also where a lot of people get stuck. The creative part of you might be drawn to the idea of morning meditation, evening journaling, regular exercise, or any number of other practices that sound appealing and beneficial. But then the practical part of your brain starts pointing out all the obstacles. Your schedule is already full, your living situation doesn't provide much privacy or quiet space, or you've tried similar things before and couldn't maintain them consistently. This is where most people either give up or start cycling through different approaches, hoping to find the one magical system that will somehow be easy to implement and maintain. But the real solution involves learning how to work with both aspects of your personality, the part that gets inspired by possibilities and the part that needs concrete, manageable steps to turn those possibilities into reality. One of the biggest insights that emerges from successfully combining creativity with structure is that your systems need to be designed around your actual life, not around some idealized version of your life. When you read about someone else's morning routine that starts at 5:30 with meditation, followed by journaling, exercise, and a healthy breakfast, it's easy to think that's what you should be doing too. But if you're not naturally a morning person, if you have young children, if you work night shifts, or if you just function better with a different rhythm, trying to force yourself into that template will create more stress than benefit. The creative approach to this challenge involves experimenting with different ways of incorporating beneficial practices into the life you actually have, rather than waiting until your life looks like what you think it should look like. Maybe traditional meditation doesn't work for you, but you discover that you can achieve a similar state of calm focus while doing routine household tasks if you approach them mindfully. Maybe you can't maintain a daily journaling practice, but you find that having a brief conversation with yourself during your commute serves a similar function for processing thoughts and emotions. The systematic approach involves tracking what actually works for you over time, rather than just relying on how something feels in the moment. You might love the idea of a particular practice, but if you consistently struggle to maintain it for more than a few days, that's valuable information. Instead of judging yourself for lacking willpower or discipline, you can use that feedback to design something that's more realistic for your personality and circumstances. This combination of creativity and structure becomes especially important when you're dealing with the social challenges that come with focusing more on inner development. Family and friends often have expectations about how you'll spend your time and energy, and when you start prioritizing practices that support your mental and emotional well-being, some people might interpret this as selfishness or withdrawal from the relationships that matter to them. The creative part of managing these relationships involves finding ways to maintain your connections while also protecting the time and energy you need for your own growth. This might mean having honest conversations about your changing priorities, setting boundaries around certain types of activities or discussions, or finding new ways to spend quality time together that align better with your values and energy levels. The systematic part involves consistently applying these boundaries and communication strategies, even when it feels uncomfortable or when people push back. It's easy to make exceptions or abandon your boundaries when you're feeling guilty or when someone is particularly persistent in their requests. But if you don't have some consistent approach to protecting your personal development time, you'll find yourself constantly starting over or feeling resentful about how much of your energy is being drained by other people's needs and expectations. Another area where this creativity and structure combination becomes crucial is in dealing with the inevitable setbacks and challenges that come with any significant life change. The creative part of you might be drawn to the idea of perfectionism, thinking that if you're really committed to inner growth and developing a peaceful, centered way of living, you should be able to maintain your practices consistently and respond to every situation from a place of calm wisdom. But the practical reality is that you're going to have days when you're tired, stressed, overwhelmed, or just not feeling motivated to do the things that usually support your well-being. The systematic approach involves having backup plans and simplified versions of your regular practices that you can fall back on during difficult times periods, rather than abandoning everything when you can't maintain your ideal routine. This might mean having a 5-minute version of your usual 20-minute meditation practice, or a simple breathing exercise you can do anywhere when you don't have access to your usual quiet space. It might mean having a few key questions you can ask yourself when you're feeling reactive or overwhelmed, even if you don't have time for your usual reflection and journaling process. The creative aspect comes in when you're designing these backup systems to feel supportive rather than like a punishment or consolation prize. Instead of seeing them as evidence that you're not doing enough, you can frame them as practical tools that help you maintain your connection to your values and goals even during challenging times. One of the most important skills that develops from successfully combining creativity with structure is the ability to adapt your approaches as your life circumstances change. What works for you during a relatively stable period might not work when you're dealing with a major life transition, increased work demands, health challenges, or changes in your living situation. The creative part of adaptation involves staying open to new possibilities and being willing to experiment with different approaches rather than rigidly sticking to methods that are no longer serving you. The systematic part involves giving new approaches enough time and consistency to evaluate whether they're genuinely helpful, rather than constantly switching between different methods whenever you encounter a challenge. This balance becomes particularly important for women who are trying to maintain their personal development practices while also meeting responsibilities to family, career, and community. There's often pressure to choose between taking care of yourself and taking care of others, but the most sustainable approach involves finding creative ways to integrate both rather than treating them as competing priorities. For example, instead of seeing exercise as something that takes time away from your family, you might find ways to be physically active together. Instead of viewing meditation as something that requires complete isolation, you might discover that certain types of mindful activities can be done while children are playing nearby. Instead of thinking that personal reflection requires long periods of uninterrupted time, you might develop the ability to check in with yourself during brief moments throughout the day. The systematic aspect of integration involves planning and preparing for the obstacles that typically interfere with your practices, rather than just hoping that motivation and good intentions will be enough to sustain you. This might mean preparing healthy meals in advance so you don't resort to stress eating when you're busy, or setting up your meditation space the night before so you don't have to make decisions about where to practice when you're already feeling scattered. It also involves developing realistic expectations about what you can accomplish in different seasons of your life. There might be periods when you're able to maintain extensive daily practices, and other periods when you're doing well to simply remember to take a few conscious breaths during stressful moments. Both phases are valuable and necessary parts of a long-term growth process. One thing that many women discover as they develop this integration of creativity and structure is that their natural rhythms and preferences often become more clear and pronounced. When you're not constantly trying to force yourself into other people's systems or ignoring your own needs in favor of external expectations, you start noticing patterns about when you have the most mental energy, what types of activities truly restore you versus just distract you, and what environments support your best thinking and decision-making. This self-knowledge becomes a foundation for designing practices and routines that feel sustainable and enjoyable rather than like another item on your to-do list. You might discover that you're much more consistent with physical movement when you do it in the morning, but you prefer reflective practices in the evening. You might find that you need more social connection during certain times of the month or year, and more solitude during others. The creative part of working with these patterns involves designing your life to honor them as much as possible, rather than fighting against your natural tendencies. The systematic part involves tracking these patterns over time so you can make more informed decisions about when to schedule important activities, when to take on new commitments, and when to build in extra support for yourself. This approach to combining human creativity with systematic thinking also extends to how you evaluate and adjust your practices over time. Instead of either blindly following a routine because it's supposed to be good for you or abandoning something at the first sign of difficulty, you develop the ability to make thoughtful adjustments based on both your intuitive sense of what's working and concrete evidence about the results you're seeing. Making these thoughtful adjustments to your personal practices becomes much more effective when you have the right foundation supporting your efforts. But here's what most people don't realize. Creating sustainable change requires a level of technical preparation that goes far beyond just having good intentions or the right mindset. Think about it this way. When you decide to focus on inner development and create a more peaceful, centered life, you're essentially building a new operating system for how you think, react, and make decisions. Just like any complex system, this requires infrastructure that can handle the demands you're going to place on it, especially as your practices become more sophisticated and your commitment deepens over time. Most women start this journey thinking they just need to find the right meditation app, buy a journal, or maybe set aside some quiet time in their day. These are good starting points, but they're like trying to run a modern business with a computer from 1995. It might work for basic tasks, but as your needs grow more complex, the limitations of your setup will start creating problems that have nothing to do with your commitment or ability. Let's start with the most basic technical requirement that almost everyone underestimates: having reliable, uninterrupted time for your practices. This sounds simple, but when you really think about what it takes to create this consistently, it becomes a much more complex logistical challenge. You need to coordinate with other people's schedules, manage your own energy levels throughout the day, and create physical and mental conditions that support focus rather than distraction. The reality is that most homes and lifestyles aren't naturally set up to support contemplative practices. You might live with people who have different schedules and noise tolerance levels. Your neighborhood might have traffic, construction, or other external sounds that make it difficult to create a peaceful environment. Your work schedule might change frequently, making it hard to establish consistent routines. These aren't insurmountable obstacles, but they do require technical problem solving rather than just hoping things will work out. This might mean investing in noise-cancelling headphones, rearranging your living space to create a dedicated area for quiet activities, or negotiating with family members about when certain areas of the house will be available for uninterrupted use. The infrastructure requirements become even more complex when you consider how much information you need to track and process as your practices develop. When you're just starting out, you might think you'll remember your insights, progress, and challenges without writing anything down. But as your understanding deepens and you start noticing more subtle patterns in your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, you need systems for capturing and organizing this information so you can actually use it to make decisions. This is where many people's personal development efforts start to break down. They have powerful insights during meditation or reflection time, but they don't have a reliable way to record and revisit these insights when they're making decisions in their daily life. They notice patterns in their stress responses or emotional triggers, but they don't track these patterns consistently enough to identify what environmental factors or lifestyle choices are contributing to the problems. Building effective information management systems for personal development requires the same kind of thinking you'd apply to any other important project. You need to decide what information is actually useful to track, how often you'll review and analyze this information, and how you'll store it so you can find it when you need it. This might involve digital tools like apps or spreadsheets, physical tools like journals or calendars, or some combination of both. But here's where it gets tricky. The tools you choose need to match your actual behavior patterns, not your ideal vision of how organized and systematic you'd like to be. If you're someone who rarely remembers to charge devices, relying heavily on phone apps for tracking might set you up for frustration. If you're always losing physical notebooks, a digital system might be more practical, even if you prefer writing by hand. The technical infrastructure also needs to account for the different types of activities and practices you want to maintain. Some practices require complete silence and privacy. Others can be done in more public or social settings. Some need specific physical conditions like comfortable seating or good lighting. Others are more flexible. Some require advanced preparation or specific materials. Others can be done spontaneously with just a few minutes of available time. When you're serious about maintaining these practices consistently, you need to set up your environment so that engaging in them requires as little decision-making and problem-solving as possible in the moment. This means having your meditation space ready to use without having to move furniture or clear clutter. It means having your journaling materials easily accessible so you don't have to hunt for a pen or find a comfortable place to sit. It means planning your schedule so you have transition time before and after contemplative practices rather than rushing directly from high-stress activities into attempts at peaceful reflection. One aspect of technical infrastructure that many people completely overlook is having backup systems for when your primary setup isn't available. Your usual quiet space might be occupied by family members, your regular practice time might be interrupted by work demands, or you might be traveling or dealing with other disruptions to your normal routine. Without backup systems, these disruptions often lead to abandoning practices entirely until you can return to your ideal conditions. But if you have alternative approaches prepared in advance, temporary disruptions don't have to derail your entire routine. This might mean having a shorter version of your usual practice that can be done in a smaller space, or portable tools that allow you to maintain some version of your routine even when you're not at home. The infrastructure requirements also extend to managing the physical and mental energy needed to maintain contemplative practices over time. Most people underestimate how much cognitive energy is required for practices like meditation, self-reflection, or mindful attention to your thoughts and emotions throughout the day. If you're already dealing with high stress levels, poor sleep, inadequate nutrition, or other factors that drain your mental resources, you might find it difficult to engage in practices that require sustained focus or emotional processing. This means that building effective infrastructure often involves addressing lifestyle factors that might seem unrelated to your spiritual or personal development goals. You might need to optimize your sleep environment, develop more efficient meal planning and preparation systems, or find ways to reduce the overall cognitive load in your daily life so you have enough mental energy left for the practices that matter most to you. Another technical consideration that becomes increasingly important as your practices develop is having systems for handling the information and insights that emerge from deeper self-reflection work. When you start paying closer attention to your thought patterns, emotional responses, and behavioral habits, you often uncover connections and patterns that weren't obvious before. Some of these insights can be immediately helpful, but others might require more time and consideration to understand how to apply them constructively. Without good systems for processing these insights, you can end up feeling overwhelmed by self-awareness without knowing how to translate it into positive change. You might notice that certain situations consistently trigger anxiety or frustration, but if you don't have a systematic approach to experimenting with different responses, this awareness doesn't necessarily lead to improvement. Building infrastructure for insight processing might involve setting up regular review sessions where you look at patterns in your journaling or reflection notes, creating simple frameworks for evaluating whether specific changes are worth experimenting with, or developing criteria for distinguishing between insights that require immediate action and those that are better addressed gradually over time. The technical requirements become even more complex when you consider how your infrastructure needs to evolve as your practices mature. What works when you're just establishing basic habits might not be sufficient when you're dealing with more subtle aspects of mental and emotional development. The systems that support a beginner's meditation practice might need significant modifications to support someone who's working with more advanced techniques or exploring deeper psychological patterns. This means that effective infrastructure needs to be designed with scalability in mind. Instead of creating rigid systems that only work under specific conditions, you want flexible approaches that can be adapted as your needs change. This might mean choosing tools and methods that can handle both simple tracking and more complex analysis, or setting up physical spaces that can accommodate both basic practices and more intensive work. One of the most overlooked technical requirements is having adequate support systems for maintaining motivation and consistency over long periods of time. Personal development work often involves periods of rapid progress followed by plateaus where it feels like nothing is changing. Without technical systems to help you recognize and navigate these natural cycles, it's easy to lose momentum during the plateau phases. This might involve creating visual tracking systems that help you see long-term patterns, even when daily progress isn't obvious. Setting up regular check-ins with supportive friends or mentors who can provide perspective when you're feeling stuck, or developing personal rituals that help you reconnect with your motivation when enthusiasm is naturally low. The infrastructure also needs to account for the fact that personal development work can sometimes bring up challenging emotions or insights that require additional support to process effectively. While contemplative practices are generally beneficial, they can occasionally surface difficult feelings or memories that need more than just individual reflection to address properly. Having systems in place to recognize when you might benefit from professional support, community resources, or other forms of assistance can prevent minor challenges from becoming major obstacles to your progress. This might mean researching counselors or therapists in your area before you need them, identifying supportive communities or groups that share your values and interests, or simply having a plan for reaching out to trusted friends when you're dealing with difficult emotions or situations. The technical infrastructure requirements also extend to managing the information overload that can come with serious personal development work. When you're actively working on yourself, you might be reading books, listening to podcasts, taking courses, or engaging with other sources of guidance and inspiration. Without good systems for organizing and integrating this information, you can end up feeling more confused than enlightened. This requires developing criteria for evaluating which sources of information are actually helpful versus just interesting, creating systems for testing and integrating new ideas rather than just collecting them, and having processes for regularly reviewing and updating your practices based on what you're learning about what works best for your specific situation and goals. When you're dealing with all this personal information and creating systems to support your inner development, you inevitably encounter something that most people don't think about until it becomes a problem: the need to protect both your privacy and the security of all the personal insights, patterns, and sensitive information you're documenting and processing. Here's the thing that catches a lot of women off guard when they start taking their personal development seriously. You begin writing down things you've never put into words before, your deepest fears, recurring thought patterns, family dynamics that you're just starting to understand, personal triggers that you don't want others to know about, and insights about relationships that could be misunderstood or taken out of context if the wrong people saw them. Most people assume that privacy is automatically protected because they're keeping journals in their homes or using apps on their personal devices, but the reality is much more complicated than that. If you live with other people, especially family members who might not understand or respect your need for personal space, physical journals and notebooks can be read without your permission. Digital tools come with their own set of vulnerabilities that most people aren't even aware of. Let's start with the physical security issues that come up when you're doing serious self-reflection work. Maybe you've started keeping a journal where you process difficult emotions or work through complicated relationship dynamics. You might think it's safe because it's in your bedroom or office, but if you have children, roommates, or even well-meaning family members who don't understand boundaries, that journal could be read at any time. This isn't just about embarrassment or hurt feelings. When you're working on personal development, especially if it involves changing patterns that affect other people, your private thoughts and insights can be misinterpreted or used against you if they're discovered before you're ready to share them. Maybe you're working through frustrations with your partner, or trying to understand your role in family conflicts. Having someone read your unfiltered thoughts about these situations before you've had time to process them fully can create drama and conflict that derails your progress and damages your relationships. The solution isn't to stop documenting your thoughts and insights, because that information is crucial for making lasting changes. Instead, you need practical strategies for keeping your personal work actually private. This might mean investing in a small safe or lockbox for physical materials, finding creative hiding places that others in your household wouldn't think to look, or developing code words and abbreviations that would make your writing meaningless to anyone else but still useful for your own reference. But physical security is actually the easier problem to solve. Digital security presents much more complex challenges that most people have no idea they need to think about. When you use apps on your phone or computer to track moods, journal, or store personal insights, that information is often stored on servers owned by companies you've never heard of, in countries with different privacy laws than your own. Most people click through app permissions and terms of service without reading them, but when you're dealing with sensitive personal information, those details actually matter. Some apps share data with advertisers, others store your information in ways that could be accessed by hackers or government agencies, and many have policies that allow the company to use your personal writings for their own research or product development purposes. This gets particularly concerning when you consider how much artificial intelligence is now used to analyze personal data. Companies are using machine learning algorithms to identify patterns in user behavior, emotional states, and personal characteristics based on what people write and how they interact with digital tools. Even if your specific journal entries aren't being read by human beings, they might be processed by computer systems that can identify intimate details about your mental health, relationships, and personal struggles. The privacy implications extend beyond just the companies that make the apps you use. If you're backing up your phone data to cloud services like iCloud or Google Drive, your personal reflections and insights might be stored alongside your photos and messages in systems that are subject to legal requests from law enforcement agencies. If you're using voice-to-text features to capture thoughts or insights, those recordings might be stored and processed by the same companies that provide those services. For women who are working through trauma, dealing with difficult family situations, or processing experiences related to domestic violence or other sensitive issues, these privacy concerns become even more critical. Information that seems harmless in the context of personal development could potentially be used to harm you if it falls into the wrong hands or is accessed without your consent. The challenge is balancing these legitimate privacy and security concerns with the practical need to use tools that actually support your personal development work. Going completely analog with handwritten journals solves the digital privacy issues but creates other problems around accessibility, searchability, and backup in case something happens to your physical materials. Using only the most secure digital tools might provide better privacy protection, but could be so complicated or expensive that they interfere with actually doing the work. Finding the right balance requires understanding both the specific threats that are most relevant to your situation and the practical security measures that you can realistically implement and maintain over time. If you're dealing with a controlling or abusive partner, your security needs are completely different from someone who's mainly concerned about corporate data collection or general privacy principles. For most women focusing on inner development and personal growth, a reasonable approach involves several layers of protection rather than trying to find one perfect solution. This might include using encrypted note-taking apps for the most sensitive insights, keeping less sensitive reflections in physical journals that are stored securely, and being very selective about which cloud services and backup systems you trust with personal information. But beyond the technical aspects of data protection, there are also important social and relational dimensions to privacy that affect how you structure your personal development work. When you start paying closer attention to your thoughts, emotions, and behavior patterns, you often discover things about yourself that you're not ready to share with others, even people you're close to. This creates a challenge because isolation can interfere with personal growth, but premature sharing can also be counterproductive. You need time and space to understand your own insights before you try to explain them to others or deal with their reactions and opinions. Having your privacy violated during this vulnerable period can shut down the honest self-examination that's essential for meaningful change. The social privacy concerns become particularly complex for women who are questioning or changing aspects of their lives that other people have strong opinions about. Maybe you're reconsidering career priorities that your family has always supported, questioning religious or political beliefs that are important to your community, or working through relationship patterns that involve people who aren't ready to examine their own behavior. Protecting your privacy during these processes isn't about being secretive or dishonest with the people in your life. It's about creating the mental and emotional space you need to work through complex issues before you're pressured to make decisions or take positions that might not align with your deepest values and insights. This social dimension of privacy also extends to the increasing tendency for people to share personal development insights and experiences on social media. While there can be benefits to connecting with others who are on similar journeys, there are also significant risks to publicly documenting your personal growth process in formats that are permanent, searchable, and accessible to current and future employers, romantic partners, family members, and acquaintances. The pressure to share your journey online often comes from good intentions, wanting to inspire others, build community, or hold yourself accountable to your goals. But the reality is that personal development is often a messy, non-linear process that involves temporary setbacks, changes in direction, and insights that might seem inconsistent or contradictory when viewed from the outside. When you document this process publicly, you're creating a permanent record of thoughts and perspectives that might not represent your final conclusions or current understanding. This can create pressure to appear more consistent and confident than you actually feel, which interferes with the honest self-examination that drives real growth. The privacy and security considerations also extend to the people you choose to involve in your personal development process. If you're working with coaches, therapists, or other professionals, you need to understand their confidentiality policies and how they handle your personal information. If you're participating in group programs or online communities, you need to be clear about what information is kept private and what might be shared with other participants. Even well-meaning friends and family members can inadvertently compromise your privacy if you share insights or progress updates with them, and they repeat that information to others without realizing the potential consequences. This is particularly challenging for women who are used to processing their experiences through conversation with others, but it requires developing more discernment about what you share, when you share it, and with whom. The privacy protection strategies you choose also need to account for the long-term nature of personal development work. Insights and information that don't seem particularly sensitive now might become more significant as your understanding deepens or as your life circumstances change. Security measures that feel excessive when you're just starting your journey might feel inadequate as you uncover more complex patterns or work through more challenging issues. This long-term perspective means that it's often worth investing in stronger privacy protection than you think you currently need, rather than trying to upgrade your security measures later when you have more sensitive information to protect. It's much easier to establish good privacy habits from the beginning than to try to secure information that's already been stored in less protected formats. The emotional aspect of privacy protection also deserves consideration. Many women find that having strong boundaries around their personal development work actually enhances their sense of empowerment and self-respect. When you take concrete steps to protect your private thoughts and insights, you're sending yourself the message that your inner life is valuable and worthy of protection. This can be particularly powerful for women who have histories of having their boundaries violated or their privacy disrespected. Taking control of who has access to your personal information and under what circumstances becomes a form of self-care and boundary setting that supports the broader goals of developing inner strength and authentic self-expression. At the same time, privacy protection shouldn't become so consuming or anxiety-provoking that it interferes with actually doing the personal development work. The goal is to create enough security and privacy to feel safe being honest with yourself and documenting your insights, not to become so worried about potential threats that you avoid the vulnerability required for genuine growth. Finding this balance often requires periodic reassessment of both your privacy needs and your security measures. As your life circumstances change, as technology evolves, and as your personal development work deepens, you may need to adjust your approach to protecting your privacy while still maintaining access to the tools and support systems that facilitate your growth. This ongoing adjustment of your privacy and security approaches naturally leads to another crucial aspect that many women discover as they deepen their personal development work: the need to create highly customized experiences that truly resonate with who you are as an individual, rather than trying to force yourself into generic approaches that work for other people. Here's what happens when you start getting serious about inner development and creating a more peaceful, centered way of living. You quickly realize that most of the advice, programs, and systems out there are designed for some imaginary average person who doesn't actually exist. The morning routine that transformed someone else's life might leave you feeling rushed and stressed. The meditation technique that everyone raves about might not match your learning style or attention patterns. The journaling prompts that help your friends process emotions might feel completely irrelevant to your specific challenges and goals. This discovery can be frustrating at first, especially if you've been hoping to find the one perfect system that will solve all your problems. But it's actually good news because it means you get to create approaches that are perfectly suited to your personality, lifestyle, and circumstances. The challenge is learning how to do this customization effectively, rather than just randomly trying different things and hoping something sticks. The first step in creating truly personalized approaches is understanding your own patterns and preferences in much more detail than most people ever bother to explore. This goes beyond just knowing whether you're a morning person or a night person. You need to understand things like how your energy levels fluctuate throughout the day, what types of physical environments help you think most clearly, how you naturally process emotions and stress, and what kinds of activities genuinely restore you versus just distract you from problems. Most people never develop this level of self-awareness because they're too busy trying to adapt to external demands and expectations. But when you're designing your own personal development approach, this information becomes essential. If you don't understand your natural rhythms and preferences, you'll end up creating systems that work against your nature rather than supporting it. For example, you might discover that you have much better focus and emotional stability when you get some form of physical movement early in your day, but the specific type of movement matters more than you realized. Maybe running or high-intensity exercise leaves you feeling depleted, but walking or gentle stretching sets you up for better decision-making throughout the day. Maybe you assumed you needed complete silence for reflection and meditation, but you actually concentrate better with certain types of background sound. The customization process also requires understanding how your personal history and current life circumstances affect what approaches are most likely to work for you. Someone who grew up in a chaotic household might need more structure and routine to feel calm and centered, while someone who grew up with very rigid rules might need more flexibility and spontaneity to feel authentic and creative. Your current responsibilities and constraints also play a huge role in determining what kinds of practices will be sustainable for you. A single parent with young children has completely different time and energy availability than someone who lives alone or whose children are grown. Someone who travels frequently for work needs approaches that can be adapted to different environments, while someone with a stable home routine can invest in creating more elaborate systems that require specific conditions. Understanding these factors isn't about making excuses for why certain approaches won't work for you. It's about gathering the information you need to design approaches that will actually work, rather than setting yourself up for frustration by trying to implement systems that aren't compatible with your reality. One of the most important aspects of personalization that people often overlook is matching your personal development approach to your natural learning and processing style. Some people learn best through reading and analyzing concepts before trying to apply them. Others need to experiment with practices first and then understand the theory behind why they work. Some people process experiences better through talking them out with others, while others need quiet reflection time to make sense of new insights. There's no right or wrong learning style, but there are approaches that will be much more effective for your particular way of processing information and integrating new practices. If you're someone who learns best through experimentation, trying to follow detailed theoretical frameworks before you've had hands-on experience will probably feel frustrating and abstract. If you're someone who needs to understand the logic behind practices before you'll commit to them consistently, jumping straight into techniques without studying the underlying principles might leave you feeling unmotivated. The personalization process also extends to how you handle motivation and consistency over time. Some people do better with external accountability and social support, while others find that external pressure interferes with their natural motivation. Some people need variety and novelty to stay engaged, while others prefer to go deep with a smaller number of consistent practices. Understanding your motivation patterns helps you set up systems that support long-term consistency rather than just initial enthusiasm. If you're someone who loses interest quickly when things become routine, you might build variation and experimentation into your approach from the beginning. If you're someone who gets overwhelmed by too many changes at once, you might focus on establishing one practice deeply before adding anything new. Another crucial aspect of personalization is adapting practices to work with your specific emotional and psychological patterns. Everyone has different triggers, different ways of processing difficult emotions, and different strategies that help them return to calm when they're feeling overwhelmed or reactive. Generic approaches often assume that certain techniques work universally, but the reality is that what helps one person feel grounded might make another person feel more agitated. Some people find that focusing on their breath during stressful moments helps them calm down, while others find that breath-focused techniques make them feel more anxious. Some people benefit from analysing and understanding their emotional responses, while others do better when they focus on accepting and releasing difficult feelings without too much mental analysis. The key is paying attention to how different approaches actually affect you, rather than assuming they should work a certain way based on what you've read or what works for other people. This requires a certain amount of experimentation and honest self-assessment, which can be challenging if you're used to looking outside yourself for validation about whether you're doing things correctly. Personalization also involves adapting the timing and pacing of your personal development work to match your natural cycles and current life demands. Some people do better with intensive periods of focused work on specific issues, followed by periods of integration and normal routine. Others prefer to make small, consistent changes over longer periods of time. Your personal and professional cycles also affect when it makes sense to focus more heavily on inner development work versus when it makes sense to maintain basic practices while focusing your energy elsewhere. There might be certain times of year when you naturally have more mental and emotional bandwidth for deep personal work, and other times when maintaining basic self-care and stress management is the most realistic goal. Understanding these patterns helps you plan your personal development efforts strategically rather than feeling guilty when you can't maintain the same level of intensity all the time. It also helps you recognize the difference between natural fluctuations in motivation and energy versus signs that your current approach isn't working and needs adjustment. One area where personalization becomes particularly important is in how you handle setbacks and challenges. Everyone encounters obstacles in their personal development work, but people have very different styles for working through difficulties. Some people do better when they analyze what went wrong and make systematic adjustments to prevent similar problems in the future. Others do better when they acknowledge what happened without too much analysis and simply refocus on moving forward. Some people need support and encouragement from others when they're struggling, while others prefer to work through challenges privately before sharing their experiences. Some people benefit from breaking big challenges down into smaller, more manageable pieces, while others do better when they address issues holistically rather than getting lost in details. The personalization process also extends to how you measure progress and success in your personal development work. Standard metrics like how many days you maintained a particular practice or how quickly you achieved specific goals might not capture the most meaningful changes you're experiencing. Maybe your progress is better measured by how you handle stressful situations, rather than how consistently you meditate. Maybe your growth is more visible in the quality of your relationships, rather than in your ability to stick to morning routines. Maybe your success looks like becoming more selective about what you commit your time and energy to, rather than becoming more productive or accomplished in traditional terms. Developing your own criteria for evaluating progress helps you stay motivated and recognize growth that might not be obvious to others or captured by conventional measures. It also helps you adjust your practices based on what's actually producing the results that matter most to you, rather than what you think should be working based on external expectations. The customization process is ongoing rather than something you figure out once and then follow forever. As you develop and change, as your life circumstances evolve, and as you gain more experience with different approaches, your optimal personal development strategy will also evolve. This means building flexibility and adaptation into your approach from the beginning, rather than trying to find the perfect system that will work for all situations and all phases of your life. It means developing the skills to evaluate what's working, what needs adjustment, and what might need to be abandoned entirely as you grow and change. The ability to personalize your approach effectively also requires developing confidence in your own judgment and experience, rather than constantly looking to external authorities to tell you whether you're doing things correctly. This can be challenging, especially for women who have been socialized to defer to experts and follow established protocols, rather than trusting their own observations and insights. But the reality is that you are the only person who has access to information about how different practices affect your mood, energy, relationships, and overall well-being. External guides and teachers can provide valuable frameworks and suggestions, but only you can determine what actually works in the context of your specific life and circumstances. This growing confidence in your own judgment about what works for your personal development becomes particularly important when you start encountering the legal and regulatory complexities that most people never think about until they become relevant to their specific situation. Here's something that catches a lot of women completely off guard as they get deeper into personal development work. What starts as a private journey of self-discovery can sometimes intersect with legal and compliance issues in ways that nobody warns you about, especially if your growth process involves changing significant aspects of your life, or if you decide to share your experiences with others in any public way. Let's start with something that seems completely unrelated but actually isn't: the content you create when you're documenting your personal development journey. Maybe you start a blog to process your thoughts, create social media posts about insights you're having, or even just share your experiences in online communities and forums. What most people don't realize is that anything you publish, even in private groups or on platforms you think are casual, can potentially have legal implications down the road. This becomes particularly relevant for women who are working through difficult family situations, processing experiences with abusive relationships, or dealing with workplace issues as part of their personal growth. When you write about these experiences, even in the context of your own healing and development, you're creating a permanent record of your perspective on events that might involve other people who could potentially take legal action if they disagree with your characterization of what happened. The laws around defamation, privacy, and harassment vary significantly depending on where you live and where the content is published, but the general principle is that you can potentially be held legally responsible for statements you make about other people, especially if those statements could be interpreted as damaging to their reputation or if they involve private information that you don't have permission to share. This doesn't mean you can't write about your experiences or share your insights with others. It just means you need to be aware of the potential legal implications and take steps to protect yourself. This might involve using pseudonyms or changing identifying details when you write about other people, focusing on your own experiences and reactions rather than making claims about other people's motivations or behavior, or consulting with legal professionals if you're dealing with particularly sensitive situations. The legal considerations become even more complex if your personal development work leads you to make significant changes in your career, relationships, or living situation. Many women discover that as they develop stronger boundaries and clearer priorities, they need to make changes that have legal implications, leaving marriages, changing custody arrangements, pursuing workplace discrimination claims, or starting businesses that reflect their new values and priorities. Each of these changes can involve complex legal requirements that vary significantly depending on your location, your specific circumstances, and the current state of relevant laws. Divorce proceedings can be affected by social media posts and other documentation of your personal growth process. Custody decisions can be influenced by your parenting choices and lifestyle changes. Employment disputes can be complicated by anything you've written or said about your workplace or colleagues. The challenge is that most people don't think about these potential legal implications when they're in the middle of their personal development work. You might write candidly about your marriage in your journal or online, not realizing that these writings could later be used in divorce proceedings. You might make posts about your parenting philosophy or discipline approaches, not knowing that they could be brought up in custody evaluations. This isn't about becoming paranoid or avoiding honest self-examination. It's about being strategic and informed about how to protect yourself while still doing the inner work that's important for your growth and well-being. Sometimes this means being more careful about what you document and how you document it. Sometimes it means consulting with legal professionals before making major life changes that have been prompted by your personal development work. Another area where legal considerations become relevant is if you decide to start helping other women with their own personal development journeys. Many women find that as they develop expertise in areas like mindfulness, emotional healing, or life transitions, they want to share what they've learned through coaching, teaching, or other forms of support. What most people don't realize is that providing guidance or support to others, even informally, can potentially create legal responsibilities and liabilities that vary, depending on your location, the specific services you're providing, and how you represent your qualifications and expertise. In some jurisdictions, certain types of coaching or counseling require specific licenses or certifications. In others, there are regulations about what kinds of claims you can make about the effectiveness of your approaches. If you're providing advice about mental health, trauma recovery, or other sensitive areas, there are additional considerations around scope of practice and the potential for causing harm if you're working outside your area of expertise. Even if you're clear that you're not a licensed therapist or medical professional, you can potentially face legal issues if someone claims they were harmed by following your advice, or if you fail to recognize when someone needs professional help that you're not qualified to provide. The business and financial aspects of sharing your personal development expertise also involve legal considerations that many women don't anticipate. If you're charging for coaching services, selling courses, or accepting donations for your content, you're creating a business relationship that involves tax obligations, consumer protection laws, and potentially professional liability issues. Different types of business structures provide different levels of personal liability protection, and the choice of how to organize your business can have significant implications for your personal assets and legal exposure. The contracts and agreements you use with clients or customers need to clearly define the scope of your services, the limitations of your expertise, and the responsibilities of both parties. The intellectual property aspects of personal development work also involve legal considerations that most people never think about. If you develop your own techniques, frameworks, or approaches, you might want to protect them through trademarks, copyrights, or other intellectual property mechanisms. If you're building on or adapting approaches developed by others, you need to understand the legal requirements around attribution and fair use. The digital platforms and tools you use for sharing your work also have their own legal implications. Most social media platforms, online course providers, and other digital services have terms of service that affect your rights to your own content and your ability to control how it's used. Some platforms claim broad rights to use, modify, or distribute content that users upload, which could affect your ability to maintain control over your personal development materials. Privacy laws add another layer of complexity, especially if you're working with clients or collecting information from people who engage with your content. Regulations like GDPR in Europe and various state privacy laws in the United States create specific requirements around how you collect, store, and use personal information, including email addresses, payment information, and details about people's personal development challenges. The international nature of digital platforms also means that your content and services might be subject to laws in multiple jurisdictions, even if you're only intending to serve people in your local area. This can create complex compliance challenges, especially if you're not aware of all the different legal requirements that might apply to your specific situation. Insurance considerations also become relevant as your personal development work expands beyond purely private activities. Professional liability insurance, general business insurance, and other types of coverage can provide protection against various legal risks, but the specific types and amounts of coverage you need depend on the nature of your activities and the level of risk you're comfortable accepting. The tax implications of personal development activities can also be more complex than most people expect. If you're spending money on courses, coaching, books, or other resources for your own development, some of these expenses might be deductible if they're related to business or professional activities. If you're earning income from sharing your expertise, you need to understand the tax obligations and record-keeping requirements in your jurisdiction. Estate planning considerations can also be affected by your personal development work, especially if you've created intellectual property, built an online following, or developed business assets related to your expertise. Making sure that your digital assets, business interests, and creative work are properly accounted for in your estate planning documents can prevent complications for your family if something happens to you. The regulatory environment around personal development services continues to evolve as these fields become more mainstream and as regulators try to protect consumers from fraudulent or harmful practices. This means that legal requirements that don't exist today might be implemented in the future, and approaches that are currently acceptable might become problematic as laws change. Staying informed about relevant legal developments requires ongoing attention and sometimes professional guidance, especially if you're working in areas that intersect with regulated fields like healthcare, mental health, or financial services. Professional associations and industry organizations often provide updates about regulatory changes that affect their members, but individuals individual practitioners need to take responsibility for understanding how these changes affect their specific activities. The international and cross-jurisdictional aspects of online personal development work add additional complexity to legal compliance issues. If you have clients or audience members in different countries, you might be subject to the laws of multiple jurisdictions, each with their own requirements around professional qualifications, consumer protection, privacy, and business practices. Working with legal professionals who understand the personal development field can help you navigate these complexities and make informed decisions about how to structure your activities to minimize legal risks, while still allowing you to share your expertise and support others effectively. However, legal guidance can be expensive, and many women in the personal development space are operating with limited budgets, which creates challenges around accessing appropriate professional support. The key is finding the right balance between taking reasonable precautions to protect yourself legally and not becoming so worried about potential legal issues that you avoid sharing your insights and experiences altogether. Understanding the basics of relevant legal considerations allows you to make informed decisions about what risks you're comfortable accepting and what steps you want to take to minimize your exposure. Finding this balance between legal protection and authentic sharing becomes much more manageable when you have solid systems in place for actually measuring whether your personal development efforts are producing the results you're hoping for, because without clear feedback about what's working, you can end up spending enormous amounts of time and energy on approaches that aren't actually helping you create the changes you want. Here's what most people don't realize about personal development work. The things that feel good in the moment aren't always the things that create lasting change, and the things that create lasting change don't always feel particularly dramatic or exciting while they're happening. This creates a real challenge because our natural tendency is to gravitate toward activities that provide immediate emotional satisfaction, even if they're not necessarily the most effective for long-term growth. Think about it this way. You might spend 2 hours reading an inspiring book about mindfulness and feel motivated and optimistic afterward. That same day, you might spend 10 minutes practicing a simple breathing technique that feels somewhat boring and ordinary. If you're only paying attention to how these activities make you feel in the moment, you'd probably conclude that reading the book was more valuable. But if you're tracking the actual impact on your stress levels, decision-making, and emotional reactivity over time, you might discover that the simple breathing practice is producing more measurable improvements in your daily life. This is why effective measurement becomes so crucial for anyone who's serious about creating lasting change rather than just feeling good about their personal development efforts. Without objective ways to evaluate what's actually working, it's easy to get caught up in activities that are emotionally satisfying but not particularly transformative. The challenge is that many of the most important changes that happen through inner development work are subtle and gradual. You're not going to wake up one morning and suddenly notice that you're dramatically calmer, more confident, or better at handling stress. These changes happen incrementally, often in ways that are difficult to notice from day to day, but become obvious when you look back over longer periods of time. This means that effective measurement systems need to capture both short-term indicators that help you stay motivated and adjust your approach quickly, and longer-term trends that reveal whether you're actually moving in the direction you want to go. Most people focus exclusively on one or the other, which gives them an incomplete picture of their progress. Short-term measurement might involve tracking things like how many days you maintained specific practices, how your mood and energy levels fluctuated throughout the week, or how you handled particular challenging situations. This information is useful for making immediate adjustments to your routine and identifying patterns that affect your consistency and motivation. But short-term metrics can also be misleading if you rely on them exclusively. You might have a week where you maintained all your practices perfectly, but still felt stressed and reactive because of external circumstances beyond your control. Or you might have a period where you struggled to maintain your usual routine but handled a major life challenge with more grace and wisdom than you would have before starting your personal development work. Longer-term measurement involves looking at broader patterns and changes over periods of months or years. This might include things like how your relationships have evolved, whether you're making decisions that align better with your values, how your physical health has changed, or whether you're able to maintain emotional stability during challenging periods. The key is developing measurement approaches that capture multiple dimensions of change rather than focusing on just one aspect of your development. Someone might make significant progress in emotional regulation but struggle with maintaining consistent self-care practices. Someone else might become much better at setting boundaries in relationships but still have difficulty managing work-related stress. Understanding these different dimensions of progress helps you allocate your time and energy more effectively rather than assuming that all areas of personal development should improve at the same rate, or that weakness in one area means your overall approach isn't working. One of the most useful measurement strategies that many women overlook is tracking the quality of their decision-making over time. When you're developing inner wisdom and emotional stability, one of the most significant changes is that you start making choices that serve your long-term well-being rather than just providing immediate relief or satisfaction. This might show up as choosing to have difficult conversations instead of avoiding conflict, investing in relationships and activities that align with your values rather than just what's convenient, or saying no to opportunities that look good on the surface but don't actually support your deeper goals. These decision-making improvements are often more meaningful indicators of personal growth than more obvious metrics like how consistently you meditate or how positive you feel on a daily basis. But they require more thoughtful observation to track effectively because the impact often isn't visible until weeks or months after the decisions are made. Another important dimension of measurement that many people miss is tracking how your responses to stress and challenges evolve over time. Personal development work doesn't eliminate difficult situations from your life, but it can dramatically change how you navigate them. You might still feel anxious or frustrated when dealing with challenging people or circumstances, but you recover more quickly, make better choices about how to respond, and maintain access to your wisdom and values even during difficult periods. Tracking these changes requires paying attention not just to how you feel during stressful situations, but how quickly you return to baseline, what strategies you use to manage difficult emotions, and whether you're able to maintain perspective and make thoughtful choices even when you're feeling overwhelmed. The measurement process also needs to account for the fact that personal development often involves periods of apparent regression or increased difficulty as you work through deeper issues or encounter new challenges. Someone who's been working on boundary setting might go through a period where relationships become more complicated as they start saying no to requests that they used to automatically accept. Without understanding that this type of temporary disruption is often a normal part of growth, you might conclude that your personal development efforts are making things worse rather than recognizing that you're moving through a necessary transition period. Effective measurement systems help you distinguish between temporary challenges that are part of the growth process and signs that your current approach genuinely isn't working and needs adjustment. The social dimension of your life also provides important indicators of personal development progress that are often overlooked. As you become more centered and authentic, the quality of your relationships typically improves, even if some specific relationships become more challenging or need to change significantly. You might notice that you're attracting different types of people into your life, that existing relationships are becoming deeper and more honest, or that you're spending less time in social situations that drain your energy or require you to pretend to be someone you're not. These changes in your social environment can be powerful indicators that your inner development work is creating real shifts in how you show up in the world. Professional and career-related changes also provide valuable measurement opportunities. As you develop clearer priorities and stronger boundaries, you might find that your work performance improves, that you're more effective at managing workplace stress, or that you're making different choices about career opportunities based on how they align with your values rather than just external markers of success. The creative and intellectual dimensions of your life can also reflect personal development progress in ways that aren't always obvious. Many women find that as they become more emotionally stable and self-aware, they also become more creative, curious, and interested in learning and growing in areas that don't directly relate to their personal development work. Physical health indicators often provide some of the most objective measures of personal development progress, especially for approaches that involve stress reduction and emotional regulation. Changes in sleep quality, energy levels, digestive health, and other physical symptoms can reflect improvements in your emotional and mental well-being that might not be obvious from subjective measures alone. The financial dimension of your life can also provide insights into personal development progress, particularly around areas like impulse control, long-term planning, and alignment between your spending choices and your stated values. Someone who's developing greater emotional regulation and clearer priorities might find that they're making different financial decisions that better support their long-term goals. However, it's important to be realistic about the timeline for seeing measurable changes in complex areas like relationships, career, and finances. These areas of life involve many factors beyond your personal development efforts, and meaningful change often takes much longer than changes in areas like daily mood or stress management. The measurement process itself also needs to account for your individual personality and preferences. Some people are naturally more analytical and enjoy detailed tracking and data analysis. Others find that too much focus on measurement interferes with their intuitive sense of progress and makes the personal development process feel mechanical rather than organic. Finding the right balance between objective measurement and subjective awareness often involves experimenting with different approaches and finding methods that provide useful information without becoming burdensome or anxiety-provoking. Some people do well with detailed daily tracking, while others prefer periodic check-ins where they reflect on broader patterns and changes. The tools and methods you use for measurement also need to be sustainable over long periods of time. Complex tracking systems that require significant daily time and attention might provide detailed information initially but become abandoned when life gets busy or when the novelty wears off. Simple, consistent measurement approaches that capture the most important information without requiring excessive time or mental energy are often more useful for long-term tracking than elaborate systems that try to measure everything in detail. The goal is to have enough information to make informed decisions about your personal development approach without becoming so focused on measurement that you lose sight of the actual growth you're trying to achieve. The measurement process should also include regular evaluation of whether your goals and priorities are still aligned with what you actually want to achieve. As you grow and change, your definition of success and progress might evolve, and your measurement systems need to be flexible enough to adapt to these changes rather than keeping you focused on outcomes that are no longer relevant to your current situation and values. This flexibility in adapting your measurement systems as your values and priorities evolve becomes especially important when you realize that personal development work itself changes you as a person, which means the skills and approaches you need for continued growth also need to evolve along with who you're becoming. Here's something that catches most women by surprise as they get deeper into inner development work. The practices and techniques that helped you make initial breakthroughs often become less effective or even counterproductive as you develop greater self-awareness and emotional maturity. What worked when you were just starting to establish basic mindfulness habits might feel too elementary when you're dealing with more complex psychological patterns. What felt supportive and nurturing when you were healing from difficult experiences might start to feel limiting when you're ready to step into greater personal power and responsibility. This evolution isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong or that your previous approaches were mistakes. It's a natural part of growth that requires ongoing investment in developing new skills and updating your understanding of what you need to continue progressing. Most people don't anticipate this need for continuous learning and skill development, so they either get stuck trying to force outdated approaches to keep working, or they abandon their personal development efforts entirely when familiar techniques stop producing results. The challenge is that the personal development industry often presents techniques and practices as if they're universally applicable and permanently effective once you learn them properly. You'll hear people talk about meditation, journaling, or other practices as if they work the same way for everyone at all stages of development. But the reality is much more nuanced and individualized than these generalizations suggest. When you're first learning to manage anxiety and stress, simple breathing exercises and basic mindfulness techniques can be incredibly powerful because they give you tools for interrupting reactive patterns and creating space between your thoughts and your responses. But once you've developed basic emotional regulation skills, you might need more sophisticated approaches that help you understand the underlying causes of stress rather than just managing the symptoms. When you're first establishing boundaries in relationships, you might need very clear, rigid guidelines about what you will and won't accept from other people. But as you develop more confidence and discernment, you might need to learn more flexible and nuanced approaches to boundary setting that account for context, relationship dynamics, and your own evolving values and priorities. This evolution in your development needs requires staying curious and open to learning new approaches, rather than assuming that what worked in the past will always be sufficient. It also requires developing better skills for evaluating which new approaches are worth exploring and which ones aren't likely to be helpful for your current situation and development level. One of the most important skills that develops over time is the ability to distinguish between techniques that are genuinely helpful for your growth versus those that just feel comfortable or familiar. As you become more self-aware and emotionally mature, you might find yourself drawn to practices that challenge you appropriately rather than just providing comfort or reassurance. This might mean moving from meditation practices that focus primarily on relaxation toward approaches that help you observe and understand your thought patterns more clearly. It might mean shifting from journaling that primarily provides emotional release toward writing practices that help you analyze patterns and make more conscious decisions about how you want to respond to recurring challenges. The learning and skill development process also needs to account for the fact that personal growth often involves integrating insights and abilities from multiple domains rather than just becoming more proficient in one area. Someone who's developed strong emotional awareness might need to work on practical life skills like time management or financial planning. Someone who's become skilled at managing their inner world might need to develop better communication and relationship skills for sharing their authentic self with others. This integration challenge requires learning how to apply insights from one area of development to other areas of your life, and also how to balance different types of growth activities so you're developing as a whole person rather than just becoming highly skilled in one narrow area. Another dimension of ongoing skill development that many women don't anticipate is the need to learn how to handle increased responsibility and influence as you become more centered and capable. When you develop inner stability and clarity, other people often start looking to you for guidance, support, or leadership in ways that you might not have experienced before. Learning how to handle this increased visibility and responsibility in healthy ways requires developing new skills around communication, boundary setting, and decision-making that many people never needed before they started their personal development journey. You might need to learn how to give advice without becoming responsible for other people's choices, how to support others without taking on their emotional burdens, or how to maintain your own growth and self-care while also being available to help the people who depend on you. The skill development process also involves learning how to navigate the social and professional challenges that can arise when you've changed significantly, but the people around you haven't necessarily changed along with you. Family members, friends, and colleagues might have expectations based on who you used to be, and they might resist or feel uncomfortable with the changes they see in you. Learning how to maintain your growth and authenticity while also preserving important relationships requires developing sophisticated interpersonal skills that go beyond just setting boundaries or communicating your needs. You need to learn how to help others adjust to changes in you without compromising your own development, how to find common ground with people whose values and priorities have diverged from yours, and how to gracefully transition out of relationships that are no longer compatible with who you're becoming. The professional development aspect of this growth often requires learning skills that aren't typically covered in personal development resources. If your inner work leads to career changes or starting your own business, you might need to develop competencies in areas like marketing, financial management, project management, or leadership that weren't relevant when you were primarily focused on inner healing and growth. Even if your career doesn't change dramatically, the increased self-awareness and emotional stability that comes from personal development work often leads to different approaches to professional challenges that require updating your skills. You might find yourself taking on more leadership responsibilities, advocating for different policies or practices in your workplace, or approaching client relationships and project management from a more values-based perspective. The ongoing learning process also involves developing better discernment about which teachers, resources, and communities are appropriate for your current development level and goals. What was helpful when you were dealing with basic survival and healing might not be appropriate when you're working on more advanced questions of purpose, creativity, and service to others. This discernment requires developing the ability to evaluate teachers and resources based on their actual effectiveness and alignment with your values, rather than just their popularity, credentials, or marketing messages. It also requires learning how to extract what's useful from various sources while leaving behind aspects that aren't relevant or helpful for your specific situation. As your skills and awareness develop, you also need to learn how to adapt general principles and techniques to your specific circumstances rather than trying to follow prescribed formulas exactly as they're presented. This requires developing confidence in your own judgment and experience, as well as the practical skills needed to modify approaches based on what you're learning about what works best for your personality, lifestyle, and goals. The skill development process also involves learning how to handle the increased complexity that comes with deeper self-awareness. When you first start paying attention to your thoughts and emotions, the patterns you notice might seem relatively simple and straightforward, but as your awareness develops, you start recognizing more subtle and nuanced patterns that require more sophisticated approaches to understand and work with effectively. This might involve learning about psychological concepts that help you understand your own patterns more clearly, developing skills for working with unconscious beliefs and assumptions that affect your behavior, or learning how to integrate insights from different psychological and spiritual traditions in ways that serve your specific development goals. The training and education aspect of ongoing development also involves learning how to balance structure with flexibility in your approach to growth. Beginners often need more structure and guidance to establish basic practices and understand fundamental concepts. But as you develop more experience and self-awareness, you need to learn how to create your own structure while remaining open to new insights and approaches that might require adjusting your current methods. This balance requires developing skills for self-assessment, goal setting, and strategic planning that allow you to take more responsibility for directing your own development rather than relying entirely on external guidance and instruction. It also requires learning how to evaluate your progress and make adjustments based on results, rather than just following predetermined programs or timelines. The community and relationship aspect of skill development involves learning how to build and maintain connections with others who support your growth while also contributing to their development in meaningful ways. This reciprocal approach to community involvement requires skills that go beyond just receiving support or consuming information from others. Learning how to mentor or guide others who are earlier in their development journey, how to collaborate effectively with peers who are working on similar challenges, and how to maintain relationships with teachers and mentors as you become more independent in your growth all require interpersonal skills that many people need to develop intentionally rather than assuming they'll emerge naturally. The integration of ongoing learning into daily life also requires developing practical skills for time management, priority setting, and resource allocation that allow you to continue growing without becoming overwhelmed or neglecting other important responsibilities. This might involve learning how to identify the most efficient and effective learning methods for your personality and situation, how to balance different types of development activities, and how to maintain momentum in your growth while also meeting your obligations to family, work, and community. This ongoing integration of learning and growth into your regular life routine becomes particularly fascinating when you start paying attention to how rapidly the tools and approaches available for personal development are evolving, especially with new technologies that are changing not just what's possible, but how we understand the development process itself. What's happening right now in the personal development space is unlike anything we've seen before. The combination of artificial intelligence, advanced neuroscience research, personalized data analysis, and new understanding of how the brain actually changes is creating possibilities that would have seemed like science fiction just 10 years ago. For women who are serious about inner development and creating lasting change, understanding these emerging trends isn't just about staying current. It's about recognizing opportunities that could dramatically accelerate your progress and avoid getting left behind by approaches that are becoming outdated. Let's start with something that's already affecting how people approach personal development, even if they don't realize it. Artificial intelligence systems are now sophisticated enough to analyze patterns in your behavior, mood, and responses in ways that can provide insights that would take human coaches or therapists much longer to identify. Apps can now track subtle changes in your voice patterns to detect stress levels, analyze your writing to identify emotional patterns you might not be consciously aware of, and provide personalized recommendations based on data from thousands of other people with similar challenges and goals. This isn't about replacing human insight and intuition, but about having access to information and feedback that can help you make more informed decisions about what approaches are likely to be most effective for your specific situation. Instead of spending months trying different meditation techniques to see which ones work best for you, AI systems can analyze your stress response patterns, attention span, and other factors to suggest approaches that are more likely to be successful from the beginning. The personalization capabilities that are emerging go far beyond just customizing content based on your preferences. We're moving towards systems that can adapt in real time based on your current emotional state, energy levels, and external circumstances. Instead of having a fixed morning routine, you might have an AI assistant that suggests different approaches based on how well you slept, what your schedule looks like for the day, and what challenges you're currently working through in your personal development. What's particularly interesting about these technological developments is how they're revealing new insights about personal development that weren't possible to discover before we had the ability to track and analyze large amounts of data about human behavior and change processes. Researchers are finding that many common assumptions about how people change and grow aren't actually supported by evidence, and that some approaches that seem like they should work well are actually less effective than alternatives that seem counterintuitive. For example, data analysis is showing that the timing and sequencing of different personal development activities has much more impact on outcomes than most people realize. The order in which you introduce new practices, the spacing between learning new concepts and implementing them, and the way you combine different types of development work can significantly affect how quickly you see results and how sustainable those results are over time. Advanced biometric monitoring is also revealing new information about the physiological aspects of personal development that most people never consider. Heart rate variability, sleep patterns, stress hormone levels, and other measurable factors are providing objective feedback about the effectiveness of different practices in ways that go beyond just subjective reporting about how something makes you feel. This physiological data is particularly valuable because it can help you distinguish between practices that genuinely reduce stress and improve emotional regulation versus those that just provide temporary emotional relief without creating lasting changes in your nervous system. Some meditation techniques, for example, might make you feel calm immediately, but don't actually change your baseline stress response, while others might feel less dramatic in the moment but produce measurable improvements in your ability to handle stressful situations over time. The neuroscience research that's emerging is also changing our understanding of how long-term change actually happens in the brain. New imaging technologies are allowing researchers to see how different practices affect brain structure and function, which is leading to more targeted approaches that work with natural neuroplasticity processes rather than against them. This research is revealing that some personal development approaches that have been popular for decades might not be the most efficient ways to create lasting change, while other techniques that seemed less important are actually more effective for rewiring neural patterns. Understanding these findings can help you focus your time and energy on approaches that are more likely to produce the deep structural changes you're looking for, rather than just surface-level improvements. The integration of virtual and augmented reality technologies is creating new possibilities for practicing difficult skills and scenarios in safe, controlled environments before you encounter them in real life. Instead of just visualizing how you want to handle a challenging conversation or stressful situation, you can practice in realistic simulations that help you develop muscle memory and emotional regulation skills that transfer to actual situations. These immersive technologies are particularly promising for working through social anxiety, practicing boundary setting, and developing confidence in situations that would be difficult or impossible to practice safely in real life. The ability to repeat challenging scenarios multiple times with different variables allows for skill development that would take much longer through traditional methods. The data analysis capabilities that are becoming available are also making it possible to identify patterns and connections that would be impossible to recognize manually. Machine learning systems can analyze your personal development data alongside information from thousands of other people to identify factors that predict success or failure with different approaches, optimal timing for introducing new practices, and early warning signs that might indicate when adjustments are needed. This pattern recognition can be particularly valuable for understanding the complex interactions between different areas of your life and how changes in one area affect others. You might discover that your meditation practice is more consistent when you've had adequate sleep, but that your sleep quality is affected by factors you hadn't considered, like the timing of your exercise or the types of conversations you have in the evening. The emerging understanding of personalized medicine and genetics is also beginning to influence personal development approaches. Research is revealing that genetic variations affect how people respond to stress, process emotions, and learn new behaviors in ways that can inform more targeted development strategies. While this field is still in early stages, it's pointing toward a future where personal development recommendations could be tailored not just to your preferences and current situation, but to your biological predispositions and optimal learning patterns. The social and community aspects of personal development are also being transformed by new technologies that allow for more sophisticated matching and grouping of people with compatible goals, learning styles, and development needs. Instead of joining generic support groups or communities, you'll be able to connect with others who are working on similar challenges at similar development stages using approaches that complement your personality and situation. These communities are becoming more dynamic and responsive, with AI systems helping to facilitate connections, suggest collaborative activities, and identify when someone might benefit from additional support or different types of engagement. The result is more effective peer support and accountability without the social complications that often arise in traditional group settings. The measurement and feedback systems that are emerging are also becoming much more sophisticated and immediate. Instead of waiting weeks or months to evaluate whether a particular approach is working, you'll have access to real-time feedback about physiological changes, behavioral patterns, and progress indicators that allow for much faster adjustments and optimization. This immediate feedback can help maintain motivation during periods when progress isn't subjectively obvious, and it can also help prevent you from continuing with approaches that aren't producing results. The ability to see objective evidence of change, even when it's gradual and subtle, can provide encouragement during the inevitable plateaus and difficult periods that are part of any significant development process. The personalization algorithms that are being developed are also becoming sophisticated enough to account for the complex, non-linear nature of personal development. Instead of assuming that everyone should follow the same progression or timeline, these systems can adapt to individual patterns of growth, including periods of rapid change, plateaus, temporary setbacks, and the integration phases that are necessary for sustainable development. These adaptive systems are particularly valuable because they can help normalize the natural ups and downs of personal development, while still providing guidance about when adjustments might be needed. Understanding that your current challenges or lack of obvious progress might be a normal part of your individual development pattern can prevent discouragement and premature abandonment of effective approaches. The integration of these technological capabilities with traditional wisdom and practices is creating hybrid approaches that combine the best of both ancient and modern understanding. AI systems can help identify which traditional practices are most likely to be effective for your specific situation, provide guidance on proper implementation, and track results in ways that weren't previously possible. This integration allows for more respectful and effective engagement with traditional practices, while also taking advantage of modern insights about learning, behavior change, and individual differences. The result is approaches that honor the depth and wisdom of traditional methods while making them more accessible and effective for contemporary lifestyles and challenges. The predictive capabilities that are emerging are also beginning to provide insights about likely future challenges and opportunities in your development journey. By analyzing patterns in your data and comparing them to outcomes from similar individuals, these systems can help you prepare for upcoming transition periods, identify skills you might need to develop before certain challenges arise, and recognize opportunities for growth that might not be obvious from your current perspective. This forward-looking approach to personal development can help you be more strategic and proactive in your growth rather than just reactive to whatever challenges arise. Understanding likely future needs and opportunities allows for better planning and resource allocation, which can make your development process more efficient and less stressful.